Hey, good morning. Tuesday. And Tuesdays we study Uddhava Gita. So before we open our books, let's do some prayers. Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Devo Maheshwara Guru Sakshat Parbrahma Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. Om Bhur Tat Savitra Varenayam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat Asto Ma Sadgamya Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya Mrityurma Amritam Gamya Om Sehna Vavtu Sehno Bhunaktu Saviryam Karvavai Tejasvi Navadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavai Om Shanti 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 Om. Let's open our books, Uddhava Gita. And we're going to start our class with the verse number 36. So, you all know that Bhagavad Gita those are the words of Lord Krishna to Arjuna, one student. And Uddhava Gita is also the words of Lord Krishna to one student, Uddhav. Bhagavad Gita has 701 verses. How many verses are in Uddhava Gita? It's more than 1,000 verses. Generally, Bhagavad Gita is known as Karam Pradhan. Because Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna, you got to do your duty. Karam Pradhan. Uddhava Gita is Bhakti Pradhan. In Uddhava Gita, Lord Krishna explains about the spirituality, religion, code of conduct for various classes of society, stages of life, supremacy of devotion, and even different paths to enlightenment. And we'll see that he'll tell us that mind is a root cause of all miseries. Mind. Even though the writer is Ved Vyasa, for Uddhava Gita also, for Bhagavad Gita also, the words are Lord Krishna's words, writer is Ved Vyasa. Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahabharata. And Uddhava Gita is a part of a Bhagavad Purana. So we should know what we are studying, why we are studying. Okay. So that's why just a little information on Uddhava Gita. So we saw last week Maharaj Yayati who belonged to the Yadu family. In fact, Lord Krishna's ancestors, he saw Avadhuta. Avadhuta is a totally detached person, just wandering, but so happy and so peaceful. And then King Yayati asked him, how did you attain this? This kind of a joy, this kind of a bliss. And Avadhuta, who was a Brahman, he told King Yayati that I have had in this nature 24 teachers. I learned from this nature. He said the earth, air, sky, water, fire, the moon, the sun, a pigeon, a python, the sea, a moth, a honeybee, an elephant, a hunter who steals honey, deer, fish, the prostitute named Pingla, a coorer bird, a child, a young girl, an arrow maker, a serpent, a spider, and a wasp. He says, I have learned many things from the behavior of these 24 things. If we keep our eyes open, we can learn. But sadly, we don't even learn from the gurus. We want to just sing the glories of the guru. We want to just say that my guru is the greatest, greater than yours. But we don't learn anything these days. That is the sadness in today's world. But these scriptures, they can open our eyes. They can show us how to get back on the right path. The path which will take us towards self-realization. So let's start our today's class with verse number 36, because we ended our class last week with verse number 35. So 36. And in this class, we do recite the Sanskrit verse also. And then we read the translation and the commentary and the purport from this book, which all of us have. So verse number 36. Yato yad anushikshyami yathava nahushatmaj tat tatha purushaha vyagra nibodh kathayami te. He says, please listen, my dear son. So he is calling this son. Who's the son? That king, Maharaj Yayati. Son of Maharaj Yayati. A tiger among men, as I tell you what I learned from each of these spiritual masters. So now we'll see that in detail, he'll talk about all these teachers. What did he learn from them? Verse number 37. Bhuter ekargamya manaho apidhiro dev vashanugai tad vidvan na chalen margad anav shiksham kshirte vartam. A sober person, even when harassed by other living beings, should understand that his aggressors are acting helplessly under the control of providence. In this way, he should never be distracted from progress on his path. This principle of tolerance I have learned from the earth. You remember the very first teacher was earth. So in this way, he should never be distracted from progress on his path. This principle of tolerance I have learned from the earth, which is always steady and tolerant, despite being repeatedly kicked by the living entities who dwell on her. So the Avadhut had learned the quality of tolerance from the earth. This is being described in this verse. Even though living entities continuously walk over the surface of the earth always remains steady and fixed. The Avadhut learned this quality from the earth. In the same way, an intelligent person should never give up following his prescribed path, whether he meets with happiness or distress brought about by the arrangement of providence. What does providence mean? It's called Deva. Deva. People consider the earth to be an object of their enjoyment rather than an instructing spiritual master. Every person tries to distract others from the path of eternal religion by causing various disturbances. Because of accepting the subordination of the demigods who fulfill our material desires, the living entities become envious of each other. When living entities are overwhelmed with miseries caused by other living entities, there is very little chance for them to exhibit tolerance. Intolerant people invariably exhibit a great propensity toward material enjoyment in this world due to lack of proper training. Nevertheless, the nature of the earth is tolerance. One can become tolerant if he considers the earth as a spiritual master and takes this lesson from her. Tolerance. Let's look at the next verse, verse number 38. So you can write them down. That Earth, the Avadhut said, I learned tolerance. Number 38. Shashwat prarth sarveha prarthe ekant sambhava sadhu shikshet bhubhrito nag shishyaha paratmatam. An intelligent person should learn from the mountain how to devote himself to the service of others, making their welfare the sole purpose for his existence. This is also the lesson to be learned as a disciple of the tree. Because if you remember, tree as well as mountains, they are part of the earth. So he's elaborating on that. Two features of the earth are mentioned here, the mountains and the trees. What does one learn from the mountain? The mountain sustains the earth, produces streams that supply water, produces various jewels. All these are meant for others' benefit. In the same way, all activities of a saintly person should be performed with the aim of benefiting others. Only then our life becomes a yagya rupi, when we are beneficial to others. This should be the nature of the devotees. Similarly, if someone uproots a tree and plants it somewhere else, the tree accepts it without any protest. One learns to do good to others from the tree. Therefore, a yogi should become like a tree. These are the teachings one should learn from the mountain and the tree, which are part of the earth. The mountain is made of stone, but clay is not so hard. That is why the hard mountain can sustain the soft soil, but soft soil cannot sustain the burden of the mountain. The earth has two kinds of ingredients, the hard mountain and the soft clay. Everyone should learn how to perform welfare activities for others from the mountain. The principal characteristic of a saintly person is that he always desires supreme benefit for others. Otherwise, a selfish interest captures the living entities and induces them to become envious of others. The lesson to be learned from the tree, which grows on the earth, is to tolerate disturbances caused by others. The non-devotee, materialistic enjoyer considers all items of this world to be objects of his enjoyment, but a devotee considers all items as his spiritual masters and learns from them different things. This is the nature of a devotee. Worship of Lord Hari is possible only if one becomes as tolerant as a tree and as immovable and steady as a mountain. Otherwise, an intolerant person can never engage in the service of the Supreme Lord. That is why Shri Gaurasundara has instructed everyone to be as tolerant as a tree in order to chant the holy name of Lord Hari. So tolerance. When we studied Vivek Chudamani, what was the word used over there for tolerance? Titiksha. So every scripture is teaching us the same values to cultivate. Okay. Verse number 39. Pran vrityeva santushena munir navendri he priya jnanam yatha na nashyet nav kiryet vang manaha. As the life air moves within the body, without expecting any support from the sense objects, a learned sage should take satisfaction in the simple maintenance of his existence and should not seek satisfaction through gratifying the material senses. In other words, one should take care of his material body in a way that his cultivation of spiritual knowledge will not be disturbed, and his speech and mind are not distracted from his spiritual discipline. So in other words, we should always keep our ultimate goal in mind. Air is of two types. The life air that moves within the body and the air of the external world. So now he's talking about the second teacher, air. See, first is earth, second is air. So what we have to learn from the life air is being described here. The life air performs its duty and is simply satisfied with food and other bare necessities of life. As the senses enjoy various sense objects such as form, taste, and so on, the life air does not. Similarly, thoughtful sages should remain satisfied even with just food and water, like the life air. One should eat only as much as is required to keep the body and soul together, so that the life air will not be disturbed. If one does not eat, his mind will not remain active, and as a result, his knowledge will be destroyed. Therefore, one should maintain his life properly so that his speech and mind are not disturbed. So it's like a moderation. Moreover, by eating abominable, dry, and unclean foods, one's mind and words become disturbed. Also, by eating palatable and rich foods, one becomes lazy, has an increase in the urge for sex, and becomes agitated in his speech and mind. Because food does affect our, not just only the body, it affects our mind. So what we eat, how much we eat, when we eat, where we eat, all that matters. It is not the duty of thoughtful men to give up their tolerance and become restless in this rarely attained human form of life. By manipulating the senses under the influence of one's mental propensity, one becomes attracted to imperfect, temporary material objects. When one thus engages in material activities that are apparently pleasing to his senses, then the path of his material enjoyment becomes clearly laid out. As soon as one forgets the Supreme Lord, one desires to lord it over this material world, which was created by Maya. As a result, his speech and mind become disturbed. Thus, he becomes situated in the darkness of ignorance and considers such ignorance or partial knowledge to be the attainment of a full knowledge. This is how he falls down from the understanding of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, by adopting the path of liberation, rejecting the path of sense gratification, there is no possibility of the speech and mind becoming covered by mixed knowledge or ignorance. In addition, disturbance of the body and intelligence under the influence of pseudo-renunciation does not help in diminishing the propensity for material enjoyment. Therefore, it is necessary to follow the path of proper renunciation and engage in the service of the Lord, which is the ultimate goal of life. Okay, so what he's saying that all this I learned from the air. And further he is going to explain, because the next verse is also, next couple of verses are still he's talking about the air, what he learned from the air. So verse number 40. Vishyeshva avishan yogi nana dharmeshu sarvatah gun dosh vyapet atmaha na vishjet vayuvat. The self-realized soul, whose heart is free from thoughts of happiness and distress, should always remain unattached like the wind. Despite coming in contact with material objects which are full of material qualities. Okay, so we live among the objects, but that doesn't mean we got to get attached to them. So this is what he says, I learned from the air. Now, what can be learned from the wind is being described. Even if one is exposed to sense gratification, one should not become attached to it. One should not place too much importance in insignificant, great, superior, or inferior material objects. As the wind cannot enter a closed room and thus does not help in the act of burning there, the introspective sage should not be the cause of any material activity. As the unsteady, restless mind engages itself in enjoying form, taste, smell, sound, and touch, it nourishes various material conceptions of life. That is why subjects of thought, such as finding faults and attributing good qualities, display their mastery over the mind. As the wind blowing from various directions may create disturbances, the restless mind searching for varieties of material enjoyment destroys a conditioned soul's attempt for self-control. It is therefore essential for a devotee to serve Lord Hari by meaning of Ekayan, with the sport of fixed intelligence. Okay, so it's like a one-pointed mind towards the ultimate goal. Then in the next verse also, he's talking about the wind, the air. Parthiva shev ihi deheshu parvishtah tad gun ashraya gunair na yujyate yogi gandher vayur iv atmaha dukh. Just as the wind, although carrying varieties of aromas, does not mix with them, the self-realized soul, although living in a material body and apparently acting like an ordinary man, is never entangled. So one should remain unattached to the bodily activities. This is the lesson one should learn from the wind. So from the earth, he's telling us that he learned tolerance. From the air or the wind, he says, I learned detachment, unattachment. So although the wind may carry good or bad aromas, it's not affected by them or does not mix with them. Similarly, even though a self-realized soul may live in a material body and act according to his acquired nature, he does not become entangled. By learning from the wind, a yogi should not become attached to his body or bodily activities. He should always know that the spirit soul is different from the material body. And we learned this from Lord Krishna when he talked to Arjuna in Bhagavad Gita. Those who are able to understand the temporary nature of the material body and mind, as well as the fault of the conditioned soul's aversion to the Supreme Lord, are fit to be called self-realized yogis. Such yogis do not act due to being driven by the three modes of material nature. And we know the three modes of material nature: Satvikta, Rajsikta, Tamsikta. Nor do they become entangled in activities that are pleasing to the body and mind. As the wind carries aromas but is not affected by any particular aroma, giving up its own nature, similarly, the self-realized soul engages in the service of the Lord while accepting the necessities of the body without attachment. In this way, he remains free from the results of activities performed by his gross and subtle bodies. Okay, by making separate notes, we got to contemplate, reflect upon it. Do we learn that or not? Or do we learn something different? Because all these examples are very familiar to us. We live on this earth. We breathe this air. Do we learn that from that or not? Do we pay that much attention or not? Verse number 42. Antrahritasya chasthir jangmeshu brahmatma bhavena samanvena vyaptyaha Vyavachedam asangam atmanaho munir nabhasatvam vitasya bhavyet. An introspective person, even while living in the material body, should consider himself to be an eternal spirit soul. He should see how eternal souls have entered all varieties of life forms, both moving and unmoving, and that they are spread all over the universe. Clearly, he is saying that even in the unmoving things, souls are there. One should also understand that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his all-pervading features as the Paramatma, is present along with the eternal souls within all bodies. Both the individual soul and the Supreme Soul can be realized by contemplating the sky. Sky is the next teacher. Although the sky extends without limit and everything rests within the sky, it does not mix with anything, nor is it divided. So you cannot divide sky. Sky is the space. Although the super soul is situated both inside and outside all objects, he remains unattached just like the sky. This is the lesson to be learned from the sky. In spite of remaining within the body, the super soul is all-pervading. By means of his transcendental realization, a yogi should think of the super soul as all-pervading, like the sky. And super soul is what? The God. Although present within all moving and non-moving living entities, he remains situated in his supreme position, just as the all-pervading sky is present within a part and is also outside the part. The super soul, although present within the material bodies of all living entities, is all-pervading. There is always a difference between the constitutional characteristics of an object and its unconstitutional characteristics. Persons who are acquainted with the science of the self never support the argument that the material body is the self. A self-realized soul never engages in accepting or rejecting material objects. He has no intention of either expanding his material enjoyment or minimizing it. That means no rag, no dvesha. Because the living entities are simultaneously one with and different from the Lord, they also possess the quality of all pervasiveness. Similarly, if the concept of achintya bhed abhed is accepted. See, achintya bhed abhed is, see, there are several philosophies from India. We talk about the Vedantic philosophy, the yogic philosophy, Sankhya philosophy, several philosophies, or dualistic philosophy, non-dualistic philosophy. This achintya bhed abhed, it really means God is simultaneously one with and different from the creation. That is achintya bhed abhed. Okay? And founder of this philosophy was Prabhupada. Okay? So, and this book is written by Prabhupada's disciples. So that's why he's mentioning over here that if the concept of achintya bhed abhed is accepted, it can be understood that the living entities simultaneously possess both the possibility for aversion to the Supreme Lord and eternal service to the Supreme Lord. By directly or indirectly attaining knowledge of the self, one also realizes his self to be separate from the material objects he sees, just like the sky, which is present both inside and outside a part. The natural characteristics of an object are realized by observing its interaction with other objects, both directly and indirectly. Okay, so that's what Avdut is saying, that I learned this by observing the space, the sky element. That God is, or the God is inside everything, and God is apart from everything too. So it's a bhed as well as a bhed. Then in next verse 43, Tejo ba anmayer bhaver medha dher vayu neritai na saprishyate nabhast tadvad kal srishter gune puman. Although powerful winds blow clouds across the sky itself is never disturbed. In the same way, the spirit soul is not transformed by contact with material nature. Although the spirit soul is awarded a body made of earth, water, and fire, and although his actions are dictated by the three modes of material nature, which are products of eternal time, his eternal nature is never affected. Just as the sky remains aloof despite the presence of clouds being driven by the mighty wind, the spirit soul is always aloof from the material body made of fire, water, earth, and so on, which was created by the material time. Okay, so we know this philosophy, it's easier to remember. That's why Bhagavad Gita, if somebody has studied Bhagavad Gita, then Uddhava Gita can be understood, because the same philosophy is mentioning over here. As clouds hover throughout the sky, being driven by the wind, the sky does not mix with the clouds, even though they appear so. Similarly, although the gross and subtle bodies seem merged with the spirit soul is always distinct from them. When the spirit soul comes in contact with material nature, he is awarded a body made of the five gross elements. When the spirit soul is liberated from the bondage of the three modes of material nature, he has no more connection with the gross and subtle bodies. Eternal time factor is the original cause of the three modes of material nature. A differentiation in the three material quality is made possible when the time factor becomes divided into past, present, and future. The conditional state produced by the material modes of nature, which are born of the divided time factor, is always distinct from the eternal spirit soul. Although clouds may appear to be part of the sky is distinct from the clouds, always maintaining its separate identity. Similarly, even though the spirit soul appears to be temporarily confined within the gross and subtle bodies, it is unaffected by them, just like the sky. So he says, I learned that from the sky. Number 44. Swachaha prakriti tah sanigdho madhurye tirth bhur nrinam muni punate apam mitram ikshop sparshaha kirtane. O king, a saintly person is naturally pure, free from all contaminations, well behaved, and a benefactor of all human beings. Just by seeing, touching, or hearing such an exalted soul, one is purified, just as one is cleansed by bathing with pure water. A saintly person, like a holy place of pilgrimage, purifies all those who meet him because he is always engaged in chanting the glories of the Lord. Now the lesson to be learned from water is being described. See, water is used to purify. Water is by nature pure and cooling. It is considered to be affectionate toward everyone. Water is sweet. Saintly persons are also sweet by nature, and they purify all living entities by instructing them about devotional service. Saintly persons should behave as the well-wishing friend of everyone, just like water. Devotees purify everyone just as water purifies everything by its contact. The people of this material world who always desire happiness and yet simply suffer from distress are very restless, and so they cannot be thoughtful. They are incessantly driven by their material conceptions of life and are firmly situated in the principle that material enjoyment is everything. Because they are exceedingly attached to material enjoyment, when their desires are not satisfied, they become angry. When they are in anxiety due to a lack of material enjoyment, they become afflicted with fear. However, the sages who are inclined to the Lord's service are not like this. They are as sanctified as water. They are naturally affectionate to everyone, and they are compassionate to all living entities. They are true friends of all living entities. They always speak very sweetly, and they are never interested in dry arguments. They are themselves places of pilgrimage because they are fully surrendered to the Supreme Lord. And thus they possess the 26 transcendental qualities. Such great souls are in direct contact with the Lord, thus are never bereft of his association. Such saintly souls purify the entire world by their constant glorification of the Lord. Simply by their association, their faithful followers become liberated from their condition of material absorption. By the phrase apam mitram, the thoughtful sages have been compared with the water. Within the water of the thoughtful sages, the three Purush incarnations, Karnanvasai Vishnu, Garbho Dakshai Vishnu, and Kshiro Dakshai Vishnu, are manifest. There is no question of contamination in transparent water by constant hearing and glorification of the Supreme Lord. Liberated sages remain freed from material conceptions and thus become qualified to touch the Supreme Lord. Their association is the cause of the conditioned souls, liberation from the restlessness of mind and the resultant conditional life. So purity is mentioning over here. Let's do one more verse and then we'll have some discussion. 45. Tejasvi tapsaha deeptohu Durshodar bhajnaha sarvabhakshyo api yuktatma nadate malam agnivat. Saintly persons have become powerful by the execution of austerities. They do not endeavor to enjoy anything material of this world. They accept food offered to them by destiny. If by chance they eat some contaminated food, they are not affected, just like fire, which burns up all contaminated substances that are offered to it. So now another teacher, he says, is fire. The lesson to be learned from fire is herein being described. The next three verses are also concerning fire. Fire is very powerful, and no one has the ability to counteract it. Fire digests the food that enters the stomach. It's called a jatragni. Those who are fire-like yogis should not accumulate eatables for the future, but should be satisfied with what is easily available. The lessons to be learned from the fire are being described in this verse and the following three verses. In this verse, it is said that when the fire burns everything, it remains unaffected. Fire doesn't become contaminated. Rather, it purifies everything. Similarly, saintly persons, even though given the opportunity to enjoy material objects, do not do so, but instead remain unattached. They are always transcendently situated, and so they do not take the pleasure in temporary material objects. This is the characteristic of self-realized souls. Such persons do not accumulate things unnecessarily. They accept things only to the extent as is necessary for their maintenance, and that also without attachment. Saintly persons are always free from the contamination of sinful activities, and thus they are the true moralists. They are not attracted to anything of this visible world, being driven by insatiable greed to attain a spiritual perfection. These are the qualities to be learned from fire. So there are a couple of more verses about fire. We'll go through them next week. But today we learned a lesson from earth, lesson from air, lesson from space, lesson from water, and a lesson from fire. This is what we learned. And we are familiar with these elements. These are all the elemental forces also. So let's stop it here and then we'll discuss. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.